Hello. I've come to believe that everyone in this culture is on some level traumatized. And our trauma never goes away. We can work with it, we can become aware of it, we can heal it, but there are aspects of it that remain in the nervous system, in the body, perhaps forever. And one of the things that gets in the way when we're wanting to reach out and connect, when we're wanting to move beyond this story of separation, is our trauma. One of the great experts on trauma in the world, Bessel van der Kolk, states that trauma does not come back to us as a memory, it comes back to us as a reaction. I once was listening to an interview with a Vietnam vet who was very involved in men's work and had been in a lot of therapy and was continuing to heal his trauma. But he stated very honestly that the trauma is so deeply embedded in the nervous system and it has such a quick response. The reactivity is so fast. He talked about one time getting mad about something when he was in the kitchen, and before he knew it, the kitchen cabinet was off the wall. He just pulled it off the wall faster than he could even watch himself do it. And so in partner relationships, in parent-to-child relationships, in employer-employee relationships, trauma rears its ugly head through reactivity. How do we know that we're reacting? Well, I think as we begin to observe ourselves more and more, we get a feel for the reactivity and that response in our body, which is different from a response of curiosity, a response of just wanting to connect. It feels different in our cells. And so as we become more familiar with that response, we begin to notice when it is bubbling up within us. I'd like to share some ways that we know we're in a reactive state or getting near to it. These come from the psychologist Robert Augustus Masters. And he's made a wonderful video series called Healing the Shadow. Here are some signs of reactivity. First of all, a disproportionate response to something, making a mountain out of a molehill. Once we see how disproportionate the response is, we can say to ourselves, there's my shadow, or there's the part of me that is wounded. There's my trauma. Another indication of reactivity is when we hear ourselves saying much the same words as the last time we were upset, as if we're somehow reading a script. A third indication of reactivity is just getting feedback from somebody else that we're being reactive. And then that tends to trigger our shame. No matter how mature we are, no matter how much work we've done on ourselves, we're going to get reactive. The issue is not to not get reactive, but to wake up in the middle of it. Another indicator is a sudden flux of over-the-top emotional intensity. We're raging or we're crying very hard. There's an upswelling within us of shame. Another indicator, an obvious loss of connection with whomever we're being reactive with. Our heart is closed. We can feel that our heart is closed. We can feel that there's no empathy or compassion, but just a wall of defensiveness. And this means a loss of connection with our own center. We feel fragmented. Yet another indicator of reactivity is that we fail to, as I mentioned, have empathy or compassion toward the person we're being reactive with. We just don't want to be hurt. We just don't want to be shamed. And so we put up the wall and we don't feel the other person. Yet another indicator is we might over dramatize what we're feeling. It's as if we're on stage and overacting as well as reacting. Often we can feel our bodies surge with emotion and we become highly animated. I'm sure you've seen this in movies or you've seen it yourself, where somebody, begins to pace and become animated and pontificate, often about their own victimization. And finally, and this is very important, an exaggerated attachment to being right. In the course, Terry has given us a wonderful poem, and the author's name escapes me, but it's about being right. And when we are attached to being right, that's when we detach from connection. So what do we do about all this? Well, increased familiarity with our body sensations, with the emotions in the body is really, really important. Because familiarity with how these emotional states manifest can begin to give us clues that, a reactivity episode is coming on. So that's one place to start. And then just as we witness ourselves and our interactions and what is going on with us internally, we develop this part that I call the witness or the observer. That isn't part of our ego, and it's not actually our sacred self. It's a part that is sort of standing back. I would like to call it a third person that is standing back and watching, observing, without judgment, without attachment to being right or wrong, just witnessing, bearing witness to whatever is going on for us. And I have found that this part is like a muscle that we need to develop, that we need to work with. And over time, it becomes stronger and stronger so that we can detect these oncoming episodes of reactivity and head them off at the pass. Just because we're familiar with the body, when we're familiar with what this reactivity feels like, and we're developing that witness. We all want to get beyond the story of separation, but there's so much programming and so much trauma that gets in our way of doing that. So my hope is that as we tune into the body, as we continue to heal, as we develop the witness, we can also move beyond the story of separation in all of our relationships, with people, with animals, with nature, and especially with ourselves.